Since the World Health Organization declared this global pandemic, countries around the world have cut their own paths forward to deal with it. Has that begun to redefine the international order as we knew it, and if so, for better or worse? Samantha Power was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations under the previous American administration. She is the author most recently of The Education of an Idealist, a memoir, and teaches global leadership and public policy at Harvard. She joins us now from Concord, Massachusetts, and it's great to see you again. Thank you for making time for us. And let's start with the easy question. How are you managing?
I'm okay. Definitely it was easier to negotiate with the Russian Federation than to homeschool. But putting that to one side, compared to what many are dealing with, I'm okay. Thank you for asking.
Good to hear it. I want to put just a short quote from one of your Harvard International Affairs colleagues, Stephen Walt, to you. He said, "The pandemic will strengthen the state and reinforce nationalism, and that COVID-19 will create a world that is less open, less prosperous, and less free." Let's start there. Do you share his view?
Well, there's certainly a risk. We've seen from time immemorial nationalists and xenophobes and demagogues taking advantage of really difficult economic circumstances to blame the other, to blame the migrant, to blame the minority. And already 84 countries have put in place emergency powers of some kind, some for very good reason, of course, as has happened to greater and lesser extents in different parts of the United States and in Canada and in democracies. But some, as in Hungary and Zimbabwe, these countries are putting in place these measures as a way of shoring up executive power and never having to be accountable to the people. And there's no expiration date on many of these emergency measures that are cropping up. So already we're seeing some of what Professor Walt has described. But on the other hand, of course, what does this crisis show? It shows the essential nature of the international system, the essential function of global cooperation, the necessity of global institutions that allow us to coordinate, that allow us to know what's happening in other countries so that we can prepare, that allow us to learn, for example, from what New Zealand is doing, to learn from what the Republic of Korea is doing. So in some senses, it actually could have the opposite effect, but it will be, of course, the nation state and governments that run nation states and leaders that run those countries that decide whether they want to go in a more illiberal direction, a more even authoritarian direction, or whether they recognize that cooperation and compromise are what we need in order to prevent such a calamity again.
Does this feel to you, though, like one of those real pivotal moments in history where we are essentially at that fork in the road? We can either go closer to global solidarity, as you've just described it, or retreat to more nationalist isolation. We're at that moment?
It's a very pivotal moment, and we don't even know how much more dire the situation is going to get. We could see tens of millions of people dying in developing countries that don't have anywhere near the infrastructure or the number of physicians or nurses or ventilators or masks that even we in the United States have been caught so flat-footed. It's not even close. There's not even basic running water in 3 billion homes around the world. And so, whatever about developed nations and what the effects are in our political structures, in the developing world, it's cataclysmic and likely to be, again, much, much worse than it is right now. So it feels like a pivot point, but I'm pretty sympathetic to the view that predispositions are going to matter a lot. So if you're Viktor Orban and the Prime Minister of Hungary, you just actually suffered your worst electoral defeat, not that many months ago. You look at this crisis and you're an opportunist and you think, okay, how do I exploit this to try to make myself prime minister for life? Vladimir Putin thinking along much the same lines. President Xi in China always looking for excuses to centralize and to crack down on dissent. And this, given the amount of rage that has boiled over in the Chinese internet, this is something that is causing him to crack down even more, to lock up whistleblowers, those who've been critical of the state. So your predisposition matters a lot. President Trump told an awful lot of lies and didn't really respect science and public health expertise before this crisis started. lo and behold, the crisis happens. He hasn't exactly changed. Those same features of 3 years of his leadership are at play in the pandemic. And so similarly, though, if you have a leader like Jacinda Ardern, who was building a reputation for finding a way to talk in plain language to her people, to build bridges across political divides that many democracies have been unable to bridge, she has thrived. When you take an Angela Merkel who combines a kind of no-nonsense, sober candor, plus her scientific background and a kind of maternal MO, that kind of leadership actually has really prospered, and her popularity and her standing is higher, not only within Germany, but all around the world than it has been in some time. And so again, I think where you were before this pandemic started says a lot about what you're going to try to get out of the pandemic and what people will take from the pandemic as they view you and your agenda.
In fact, as I was reading your piece in the New York Times, I saw Bret Stephens had a piece in which he said he'd like to have Angela Merkel as the next vice presidential candidate on Joe Biden's ticket. I don't think that's allowed, but it was an intriguing idea anyway. You recently said, among the global community, there are, quote, a lot of lessons that sadly we are not applying to the COVID response. The show of disunity is devastating. We have compounded a disaster. Amplify on that a bit, if you would. How so?
Well, I'm influenced here by the experience I was privileged to have as UN ambassador when we dealt with the Ebola crisis, and President Obama went to the United Nations, gathered the heads of state and said, look, here's what we, the United States, are going to do. We're going to send 3,000 troops and health workers into West Africa. And in so doing, we're going to leverage what we're doing to try to see if we can get more out of the government of Canada, more out of the United Kingdom, more out of France, more out of China, even more Cuban doctors. The Cubans deployed more doctors to West Africa during the Ebola crisis, at least on a per capita basis, than any other country. And so that's how international institutions work when they work. They don't magically congeal, and collective action problems don't magically get overcome. You need kind of catalytic actors who are able to mobilize other countries. And of course, for many decades, on good days, that has been the United States. Not in every domain. Countries like Canada had to step up and basically introduce the world to the idea of peacekeeping. In the realm of global public health, the United Kingdom has been at the vanguard in many crises. And so there's a bit of a division of labor, but Western, developed, richer countries have tended to be at the fore, catalyzing other countries to step up. And while it's absolutely the case that China is now the #2 donor to the United Nations, it has vast leverage by virtue of the Belt and Road Initiative, by virtue of it being the #1 trading partner for so many countries all around the world. All of the loans that it dispenses gives it huge leverage, but it doesn't build global coalitions. Even here, where you see President Xi trying to rehabilitate China's reputation by virtue of the mishandling of the crisis and the cover-up in the early months, it's dispensing medical supplies, and those medical supplies can be invaluable, but it's not doing what you would do if you were looking to build a global response. It is providing those supplies bilaterally. It wants China's brand to be on those supplies. It doesn't want those supplies laundered through the United Nations, where it looks like it's a UN effort. It wants that public relations benefit. And while that's understandable, that's self-interested, it's not the way that you actually leverage what you're doing to get other countries to do far more. And the U.S. response, I mean, it's hard to even know where to begin, but certainly to cut off funding to the only global health organization at the height of the largest pandemic since 1918 will go down in the history books as being one of the great tactical and strategic blunders in U.S. history.
I hear what you're saying, but I suspect there are a lot of your fellow countrymen and women who think, yeah, right on, President Trump, you should defund this organization, because after all, they're disproportionately influenced by China, and they have not exactly covered themselves in glory from the beginning of this whole thing. What would you say to those folks who believe that?
Well, I think part of the challenge here is that there's a tendency to forget that international organizations are made up of countries. Countries are run by governments. Governments are headed by leaders, and leaders, by and large, dictate what those governments are doing within international organizations. And so I do think the World Health Organization has to be held accountable for its reticence, particularly in the period where it was trying to negotiate access to China. It was trying to send a team to Wuhan. But, I mean, let's be clear, it issued a global health emergency in January, late January, just a month after the first case was reported. It did make public what it knew on the basis of what was happening in Wuhan. Again, later, perhaps to acknowledge forthrightly the human-to-human transmission, more trusting of Chinese assurances. But you know how the international organizations become less trusting of Chinese misinformation? When the United States is actually participating in those organizations, and when it is using its leverage, as we did during the Ebola crisis, to help those organizations thrive in the time of a crisis. A civil servant doesn't get to just march into Wuhan. A government has to allow it. Well, how would we have secured from China permission to access Wuhan sooner? The United States and the other countries of the world should have been putting vast pressure on Beijing in order to allow that access. The United States should have been sharing with the world what its intelligence professionals knew about what was happening in Wuhan. Who has a better and more robust intelligence apparatus, the United States government or the World Health Organization? Answer, the United States government. But President Trump was not listening, was not heeding those intelligence warnings, and we were not using our pulpit to make public what we knew about the devastation that this pandemic was causing behind Chinese lines, nor, of course, were we taking the preparations that we now wish we had taken in order to ensure that our people remain safe.
You have described, though, a successful global response as requiring not just the pooling of resources, but a team captain. And clearly, you don't think Donald Trump is the team captain. But I do want to know whether you think China, notwithstanding what you just said, has the capacity or desire to be that international team captain.
So far, we don't see evidence of that on the pandemic, and we don't see evidence of that in many domains. For example, if you're looking and hoping that the war in Yemen will be brought to an end, or the war in Syria, issues that we in the Obama administration, of course, have responsibility for not having been able to use our diplomatic heft to end those crises. But nonetheless, looking particularly at China's role, you don't see leadership in the field of peace and security from China yet, in the way that you would need to if you were to bring all the stakeholders together to try to end modern conflicts. Indeed, China is not even allowing the issue of the pandemic, hasn't for many, many weeks really allowed it to be the subject of a UN Security Council resolution, because China doesn't want to acknowledge that the pandemic itself is a threat to international peace and security. So there's a squeamishness when it comes, or let's say a hesitancy when it comes to taking leadership in peace and security issues. On the pandemic, there is leadership, but it is bilateral leadership. So there is a desire to be the first out the gate with the vast stockpiles of medical supplies that China is in a unique position to help particularly developing countries get access to. That's going to be incredibly important, but it's not the same as getting the world to sing from the same hymn book. It's not the same as convincing governments, for example, that are not allowing the internet, let's say in refugee camps like the Bangladeshi government, where that you have the hundreds of thousands of Rohingya who are at grave risk of this pandemic. It's not going to be the Chinese government that engages the Bangladeshi government and says, hey, you've got to turn back on the internet so that people can get educated about how to do what they can to prevent this virus spreading. That's not something that China's going to be comfortable doing, engaging on governance issues anytime soon. And governance will, of course, have a significant bearing on how this pandemic plays out in many vulnerable parts of the world. So it's leadership, but it's not the building of a global coalition. It can be useful, it can even be critical, but it's not filling the gap that has been left by the U.S. retreat. So you have now something more akin to a self-help society than a China-led world order. We're in some kind of purgatory, you might say.
Understood. I mentioned earlier that you wrote a piece in the New York Times some weeks ago, and I want to read just a little excerpt of that piece and then ask a question coming out of that. You wrote, COVID-19 is poised to tear through poor, displaced, and conflict-affected communities around the world. 3 billion people are unable to wash their hands at home, making it impossible to follow sanitation protocols. Because clinics in these communities have few or no gloves, masks, coronavirus tests, ventilators, the entire country of South Sudan has 4. Or ability to isolate infected patients, the contagion will be exponentially more lethal than in the developed countries it is currently ravaging. Now, you wrote that on April 7th. Do you have any reason to believe the situation is any different today?
No, not at all. Indeed, we're now seeing some of that play itself out. You have the World Food Program just in the last week warning of famine of biblical proportions. So before you even get to the lethality of the pandemic, there's, of course, what are the economic effects of the global economic shutdown on the poorest parts of the world. So you now have the World Food Program warning that 265 million people are at risk of severe malnutrition, if not outright starvation. And this at a time when Western nations, developed nations, are cutting and not expanding their funding for such things as food supplies. So that's just the economic toll. And then on the health toll, what we're already seeing in places like Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, even a country like Algeria that has some basic health infrastructure, more than, of course, a country like DRC, you're seeing much higher lethality rates, at least on the basis of what we know so far. Now, the testing is not exhaustive by any means, but in terms of those who are coming in for treatment and have been tested and tested positive, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you're seeing lethality of 8%. In Mali, 6%. And so already, again, think of the underlying weaknesses in the health systems that we see in the United States affecting poorer communities, and imagine that magnified perhaps by an exponent, again, in vulnerable communities. South Sudan not only has 4 ventilators, it has fewer than 200 doctors in the entire country. And so you are likely to see, when the disease hits, because of overcrowding, the contagiousness of the disease will be even greater because social distancing not available. The ability to do hand washing and things that we take for granted here, even if we're not ourselves that good at putting in place this behavior modification, we're not thinking, oh, will we be able to find a faucet? But in so many parts of the world, that also is going to aid the spread of the disease. And then once you catch it, the cushion, the treatment, the care, it's just not available. Even the clinic, right, in rural and remote parts of developing countries, even basic access to a clinic is going to be lacking. And so this is why you see warnings of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of infections in developing and poorer countries.
I do wonder about this set of circumstances, though, and that is, and I suspect it's the same in New England where you are, we are getting reports daily of healthcare institutions in this province and in this country which don't have adequate personal protective equipment for their frontline healthcare workers. And you and I are lucky enough to live in one of the richest countries in the world. Does this not inevitably lead to increased competition as opposed to cooperation for governments in different countries around the world to want to get what they need for their people, and to hell with the developing world?
Well, I think that's the attitude that many have. If not to hell with the developing world, but a kind of each man for himself. And in a crisis, that's perfectly human. I think all of us instinctively focus first on our families, and the circles widen from there. So it's, again, understandable. But if you're looking out for your own self-interest, it is just not the case that developed countries are going to be able to return to normal, particularly in the economic sphere, but also just in terms of the virus itself, until there's a vaccine at least, while this pandemic is raging in developing countries. We're just too connected. And so while it does feel very zero-sum when you're talking about procuring masks, and now the big issue in the United States is swabs. We have more tests brought online, but not the swabs, apparently, to administer the tests crazily. And so all of those are in short supply globally. But, companies are putting in place cycles of manufacturing now, and they're looking out. And this disease has spread in a very staggered way. It is, of course, a very rapid pace, all things considered, but nonetheless, there has been lead time. The United States had months of lead time really before it hit hard here, making our inability to stockpile those provisions inexplicable, really, and will be something puzzled over, I think, for generations. I don't know exactly the situation in Canada and where responsibility lies there for those shortfalls. But I mean, these are not precious gems, that are inherently in short supply. These are items that can be produced in mass, and one can look ahead and know that, the lead time that you have the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time, to procure, as we are beginning to do now, enough masks, of course, for ourselves and enough PPE for ourselves, while also ensuring that the World Health Organization, which has, different suppliers in many cases, that they have the resources in order to be able to help developing countries' governments procure supplies for themselves. It's not an act of charity. It sounds like one, again, given the crisis that each of us is facing in our own home country. But until the pandemic is contained, and preferably, of course, we all want to see it eliminated and eradicated, but containment is huge. And while it is raging in parts of the world where the United States, for example, has rich and intricate family ties, economic ties, trade ties, as long as that pandemic is raging, our ability to again, return to normal, to get people back to work, to deal with the other form of suffering and hardship that this pandemic has wrought is going to be very limited. And so we just have to think in terms of enlightened self-interest. And that means having those professionals in each of our governments who work on international development, humanitarian assistance, to be working with other countries to think about where those additional supplies can be procured, and to be dedicating resources at the same time that we are looking out for, of course, our frontline health workers, our families, and those around us.
In our last couple of minutes here, let me ask you about this comparison. I guess it was almost 2 decades ago that 9/11 basically redefined what national security meant to Americans and beyond. Do you think this pandemic is similarly going to redefine what it means to keep a nation safe going forward?
Well, interestingly, immediately after 9/11, you might remember the language was all about not only terrorism, first and foremost, but also threats that cross borders. This recognition that, kind of the old school mentality of what national security was, guarding against great power conflict, and being able to fight, one major war and 2 small wars at once, that was an anachronistic way of thinking. And so rhetorically, you've for decades really been hearing a lot about the need for our collective security instruments to be able to combat those threats that don't respect borders, that are transnational. But yet our resourcing has really predominantly gone to the military threats underneath that chapeau. And so, for example, since 2010, the United States has spent about $180 billion a year on counterterrorism-related activities, $2 billion a year on pandemic preparation response. And that just is the wrong balance. The United States right now, to this day, has U.S. forces who are involved in some kind of counterterrorism activity in 40% of the countries of the world. And these are soldiers whose families have had to put up with their men and women, their fathers, their sons, their daughters, serving on their 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th tours in different places. Not just in the high-profile places like Afghanistan and Iraq, but in places like Mali and Niger and Somalia. And this is not sustainable for the United States. But it's a broader conversation about global investments, because if you tallied up all of the military investments from all of the countries of the world and then tallied up the investments in global health security architecture, or even national pandemic response architecture, you would see a similarly wildly disproportionate ratio. And so you ask the question of, will we learn from this? One certainly hopes so. I mean, pandemic preparation has been a bit of a polarizing issue, in part because President Obama was the one who dealt with H1N1, dealt with Ebola. And so when President Obama, of course, as a Democrat, went to Capitol Hill and sought greater funding for pandemic preparedness, the Tea Party constituency within the Republican Party and the Republicans who controlled the Senate and then the Senate and the House, they made it very difficult for us to get the kind of budgetary allocations that we sought. I hope now, in the wake of multi-trillion-dollar stimuli, that political constituency would be there, that there'd be more of a political consensus in this country, and that solidarity and that unity that we've at least seen in these small ways, related at least to funding the stimulus, that would play itself out afterwards, and that it wouldn't all get caught up in recrimination, but that preparedness would be a huge part of the conversation. But there's no guarantee, especially with our divided media environment and the echo chambers that people of different political persuasions inhabit, and sometimes the fact-free nature of those environments and the misinformation. But that would be the hope, that there'd be a recalibration, a prioritization of not just this issue, but of course issues like climate change as well, which move more slowly than a pandemic, but that themselves fuel the kinds of global health crises that could come home to roost in lethal ways.
Ambassador Power, it's really good of you to spare so much time for us tonight on TVO. It's been many years since you were on our channel, so we're glad to reconnect. And we wish you and yours well in Concord, Massachusetts, the heart of the revolution. Thanks for joining us.
Stay safe. Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.